Leah had always believed that silence could heal. After a year that dissolved her relationship, her job routine, and nearly her sanity, she decided to move somewhere quiet. Her budget was thin, but she found exactly what she thought she needed: a century-old house on the edge of a small town. One of those places with a single diner, a post office inside a gas station, and nights so still that the world felt paused. The house wasn't perfect, but the rent was cheap, the location peaceful, and the architecture charming in its worn-down way. It looked like a place that held memories rather than problems. Inside, the air carried the faint smell of dust and old wood. The walls had that antique yellow tint that no amount of scrubbing could brighten. Floorboards creaked not from movement, but simply from existing. The ceilings were high, the windows drafty, and everything felt a little crooked, as if time had leaned against the structure and never stepped back. But to Leah, it felt quiet. And quiet was something she hadn't had in a long time. She spent her first evening cleaning the living room. The previous tenant had left behind a few random items: a rusted coat rack, a chipped vase, a single wooden chair missing a spindle. Nothing special. But in a narrow hallway between the kitchen and the spare room, she noticed a small door she hadn't seen before. It blended into the wall almost perfectly, painted the same dull cream color. She tugged it open and found a tiny storage space no bigger than a closet. Inside, among stacked newspapers from the early 90s and a broken broom, something large leaned against the wall, wrapped in heavy fabric. It was stiff, rectangular, and unmistakably a framed painting. Leah hesitated. It felt intrusive to touch something that had clearly been left hidden for years. But curiosity pulled harder than caution. She dragged the object out and loosened the dusty cloth. The smell of old canvas drifted upward, earthy, slightly metallic, like a museum basement. When the painting finally revealed itself, Leah felt a strange stillness settle over her. The artwork showed a woman seated in a chair, her head slightly tilted downward, her eyes fully closed. Her dark hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and her hands rested delicately in her lap. At first glance, it wasn't ominous at all. If anything, it was beautiful. Soft, muted colors, expert brushwork, a calm, almost serene composition. But something about it felt heavy, as if the image held a weight that didn't belong to it. What bothered Leah most was the background. It was too dark, too undefined, like a void swallowing the edges of the subject. The longer she looked, the more she had the sense that the woman wasn't simply sitting in a shadowed room, she was emerging from it, or sinking into it. Still, Leah convinced herself it was simply an old painting abandoned by a previous tenant. Maybe even valuable, maybe the work of someone local. The more she rationalized it, the more she felt silly for being unsettled. She carried it to her bedroom and hung it above her desk, thinking it would give the room a vintage charm. That night, the house made its usual sounds, soft groans of the floorboards adjusting, a window rattling when the wind pressed against it, faint trickles in old pipes. But around 2 a.m., Leah woke up. Not from a noise, but from a feeling, like someone was standing near her. She sat up in the dark, blinking away sleep, and her eyes landed on the painting across the room. In the faint moonlight, the woman's closed eyes seemed almost luminous. Leah shook her head. It was just shadows and imagination, the kind that filled old houses with illusions. She went back to sleep. The next morning, as she sat at her desk, Eating cereal and scrolling through emails, something about the painting felt off. She leaned closer. She couldn't explain it, but she had the impression that the woman's head was tilted slightly differently, just a fraction more upward than before, as if her chin had lifted overnight. She brushed it off. Maybe she hadn't studied it closely yesterday. Maybe nostalgia and stress made her misremember. She worked for several hours, occasionally glancing at the painting. Each time, a small unease nagged at her chest. When she stepped away to make coffee, she caught herself glancing over her shoulder, checking whether anything about the painting had changed. Of course it hadn't. That was ridiculous. Later that week, the dreams started. At first, they were vague, walking through dark hallways that looked vaguely like her new home, with the feeling that someone trailed behind her. Then, gradually, the dreams sharpened. She saw the woman from the painting standing in the kitchen or by the foot of the stairs, always with her eyes closed, always motionless. Leah never saw her face turn, but she always woke with the sensation that the woman had been about to open her eyes. One morning, after a particularly vivid dream, she stood in front of the painting for a long time. The closed eyes, the downward tilt of the head, the soft colors. Nothing had changed. Nothing had moved. Yet she couldn't shake the creeping thought that the woman didn't look as deeply asleep as before. Her eyelids appeared slightly less relaxed, like the faintest tension hid underneath. Leah took a picture of the painting on her phone, more for reassurance than evidence. She compared it with memory, searching for inconsistencies. She found none, but unease lodged itself deeper. She told herself it was just stress. The house was old. She was lonely. Moving always stirred emotions. There was nothing wrong. But that night, when she woke again at 2 a.m., not from a sound, but from that same suffocating feeling of being watched, she sat up, looked at the painting illuminated by the pale glow of moonlight, and realized with a cold jolt that the woman's eyes were not closed as tightly as before. They were still shut, but not fully, as if something behind them was beginning to wake. In the following days, Leah tried to convince herself that nothing unusual had happened. She told herself the eyes only looked different because she was tired, because the light changed, because her imagination had been sharpening edges that weren't there. But the truth sat beneath her explanations like a cold stone. Every morning, the painting seemed a little less familiar. The shift was always subtle, a hint of shadow that hadn't been there before, a barely noticeable tightening in the figure's jaw, a change so faint that if she tried to describe it to someone else, she knew she would sound delusional. Yet somehow, she knew the painting was changing. It wasn't a thought, it was an instinct, deep and old, like the warning you feel when walking into a dark room. On the fourth morning, Leah stood in front of the painting for over 10 minutes, staring at it until her eyes watered. She had taken another photo of it the day before, and when she compared the two, the difference was undeniable. The woman's eyelids were still downcast, but the eyelashes pointed at a slightly different angle, like someone halfway through opening their eyes before stopping. It wasn't just her imagination. The painting was changing. She deleted the photos, as if removing the evidence could make the truth vanish with them. That afternoon, she decided to call the landlord, asking casually if he knew anything about the painting she found in the closet. He sounded puzzled. He said he'd never seen it before. He'd owned the house for years and claimed he didn't recall any tenants mentioning artwork left behind. "Probably just junk someone stuffed away," he said. "If you don't want it, toss it." But Leah couldn't bring herself to throw it away. Something about the painting pulled at her, fascination mixed with dread. She spent hours online searching for information about the artist, but the painting was unsigned. She posted a blurry image in an art forum, asking if anyone recognized the style. Most comments dismissed it as generic portraiture until one user responded. "Looks like one of Aldrich Rowan's early works. If it is, get rid of it." No further explanation came, and when Leah tried to message them, their account had already been deleted. The name, however, sent her spiraling down a rabbit hole. Aldrich Rowan was a painter from the 1930s, known for creating portraits that seemed almost alive. Rumors about him were scattered in obscure blogs and old newspaper archives. Subjects who sat for him suffered from nightmares. One woman vanished after a final session. Rowan himself disappeared mysteriously in 1941. Some people claimed he was a genius ahead of his time. Others suggested he was obsessed with the idea of capturing more than a likeness, capturing presence. Leah stared at the painting again that evening, thinking about the artist's obsession, and a cold understanding settled in her stomach. The painting didn't just feel alive, it felt inhabited. The next night, the dreams grew stronger. Leah found herself walking through her own home, but everything was slightly wrong. Walls too tall, rooms too narrow, air too thick. The painting hung in every hallway, its frame pulsing, its subject's head slowly rising. When she reached the kitchen, she saw the woman standing there, identical to the figure in the portrait, but more solid. Her eyes still closed, her chin trembling, as if she were fighting to lift her eyelids. When Leah woke, her body was cold, as if she had been standing barefoot on concrete. She walked through the house to ground herself, telling herself she was rational, sane. But when she reached the living room, she stopped so suddenly she almost lost her balance. The painting had changed again. The woman's eyelids were no longer gently closed. They were now slightly parted. A thin glimmer of darkness showed beneath them, the faintest suggestion of pupils hidden in shadow. Leah stepped closer, her breath tight in her chest. She could see a tiny hint of reflection in the slit of darkness, like the surface of an eye catching light. The background behind the woman seemed deeper too, darker than before, swallowing the soft colors that once surrounded her. It was as if the painting were being consumed from within, the edges slowly dimming while the figure grew sharper, more real. Trying to calm herself, she reminded herself she was awake and rational. But the painting made her feel neither. She tried calling the art forum user again. Their account remained gone. She contacted the local library and asked if they had anything on Aldrich Rowan. The librarian hesitated before saying there were only brief mentions. Rowan had lived in town for a short time, renting a small cabin, mainly keeping to himself. He was rumored to be eccentric, but in towns like this, that could mean anything. Leah drove to the library that afternoon anyway. Inside a dusty stack of local history books, she found a brief paragraph about Rowan. It mentioned that his final model, a woman named Elise, vanished after a portrait session and was never found. The police suspected Rowan, but the case went cold. Rowan disappeared soon after. The painting Elise had posed for was never recovered. When Leah compared the vague description of Elise, dark hair, slim build, serene expression, to the subject of her painting, her pulse quickened. It matched too well. It wasn't proof, but the possibility lodged itself in her mind like a splinter. That night, she covered the painting with a towel, trying to hide it from view. But as she lay in bed, she felt the same suffocating pressure as before. the sensation that something was trying to open its eyes in the darkness of her room. A faint tapping sound echoed from the wall where the painting hung, a soft, rhythmic tick like nails against wood. Leah pulled the blanket to her chin, telling herself it was nothing. But when she checked the painting the next morning, the towel had slid halfway off the frame. She hadn't touched it. No breeze could have moved it, and the eyes on the canvas were now unmistakably, undeniably half open, gazing slightly downward as though the woman were looking at something just below her. Something in the room. Something alive. Leah backed away slowly, a tremor moving through her. She realized the truth with chilling clarity. The painting wasn't simply watching her, it was waking up.